Hello and welcome. We're very excited to be speaking here today about our short film for FX's Shogun, one of our all-time favorite projects that we've done over the last few years at Method. My name is John Likens. I'm Executive Creative Director at Method Studios. I'm based in New York City. At Method, I wear a lot of hats. I'm a director, I'm a designer, I'm an animator, and I guess what that means is I like to be very hands-on. I take a very hands-on approach with my work. I work across many different kinds of projects at Method, from directing VFX-heavy live-action commercial and advertising work to designing and crafting title sequences for film and TV series. Most recently, we did that kind of crazy opening sequence to Deadpool and Wolverine, which a few people went to in the theaters, I heard. And then, yeah, we also help game studios create and launch cinematic trailers and films.
Hey guys, my name's Seiji Anderson, and I'm an art director at Method. So I've been in the motion design industry for maybe around 5 years, and before that, I got my start as a 3D artist in the architecture and visualization industry. And so I've worked on a number of titles. Some of them are Marvel's Moon Knight, Pixar's Lightyear, and most recently, Deadpool and Wolverine with John. So yeah, really excited to be here.
Cool. Should I intro?
Yeah.
What's up, everybody? I'm Sam, so I'm Executive Creative Director, and I run the real-time side of things over at Method. Basically, I spent a lot of time in games, probably the last 20 years, directing cinematics and trailers. And probably about 6 years ago, I saw really where game engines were going and how they were hitting Hollywood head-on. So I basically set up a division comprised of a lot of VFX artists and game artists and technical artists, and really just focusing on photoreal content. And it was rough year one of setting up the pipeline because I really tried a lot of things with the visual effects side and just trying to make it work. But eventually we adopted a lot of the best practices from games, and we took that and set up the pipe. And so we just game cinematics kind of built our pipeline. But then we found there was a lot of other projects that were coming on our plate, and we're like, okay, should we take this on? And so it really forced us to rethink the engine in a lot of different ways, and so we worked on The Mandalorian, doing all the virtual production stuff for the walls, and then crowd simulations and car commercials, 3D holograms, and just a lot of crazy stuff. But when this project came on for Shogun, it was a really cool project to say, okay, can we do this in the engine, and can we do it in a very stylized way? And so you're about to see something pretty fucking cool.
So this is a 6-minute, fully animated short film that the clients were calling companion content. Basically, it was created as sort of a primer and a deep exploration into some of the historical and cultural context that sort of helps the audience journey into the world of Shogun. That they're getting thrown into this historical time period with the series. And we feel a lot of you probably haven't seen the film yet. Maybe some of you have, but we're happy to screen it here for you today at Unreal Fest, and we'll break down the creative process and everything afterwards.
Some are born under the banner of greatness. Others must claim it. For centuries, Japan was ruled by a sovereign emperor. A hereditary nobility held power over the people, the imperial court. Over time, wealth and power shifted and disseminated across the country. Provincial affluence gave birth to a burgeoning group of feudal lords. the country spiraled into armed conflict, giving rise to a more definitive militaristic rule. The samurai, a warrior class, bound to a code of conduct and sworn duty to protect their lord's land at all costs, emerged. The unprecedented rise of the samurai severely diminished the emperor's authority, unleashing an insurrection that established a new commanding ruler atop the social structure, the shogun. The dominance of the shogun furnished peace for a period, but unrest slowly simmered ever greater as nobles continued the battle to expand their fiefdoms. Conflict reignited as warring states threatened to drive the country apart, ultimately plunging Japan into hundreds of years of turmoil and civil war. War was a way of life. Death before dishonor. The essence of what it means to be a samurai. But true honor can only be attained through victory in battle. Bound by the code, defeated samurai must take their own life through the ritual of seppuku. The preceding events accurately reflect the true history of the samurai's rise to power. These events inspired the acclaimed fictional novel by James Clavell. Now, enter the world of the original series, Shogun. Japan, 1590. Chaos has reigned since the fall of the last shogun. The country enters a period of peace under a new leader, the Taiko. But this moment of unity is short-lived. The Taiko dies, leaving behind a 7-year-old heir not yet of age. The fate of the nation is thrown into jeopardy. A council of regents is assembled. One busho from each of the 5 major regions who control territories of strategic importance. Yoshi Toranaga of Kanto. Sugiyama Josui from the northern regions. Ono Harunobu from Bungo. Kiyama Ukon Sadanaga from Higo. Ishido Kazunari of Goshu. The samurai code binds the regents to duty, even as distrust poisons the council. In the absence of Nakamura, Ishido takes the seat at the helm of Osaka Castle, the impenetrable fortress where the highest of the warrior class converge at the center of power. Within this samurai class, women are educated, accomplished, trained in the ways of war, and maneuver to influence the regents. Beyond these imposing walls lies the gateway to trade and influence from the outside world. A Christian faith war is bleeding onto the shores as Catholics and Protestants carve up the Western world into religious battlegrounds. The Catholics assert their reach across the Japans, attempting to convert the masses. These foreign agendas further deepen the divides within the country, where each busho has an unspoken agenda for greater power and control. They build upon their already great samurai armies. But the will to rule will be forged in the blades of the samurai's katana, as new and ancient bloodlines struggle for supremacy. The state is on the precipice of war when John Blackthorne, a privateer from the west, is shipwrecked along the coast. Toranaga appoints Lady Mariko, a trusted advisor, as Blackthorne's interpreter and teacher. Now, 3 fates will be forged in one purpose: to fight for the future of a vast nation as history collides with the dawn of a new era.
There you go. Thanks. Thank you. So, starting at the beginning, when FX Networks, reached out to us to collaborate on this film, all they had was an early script and some reference photography of the actors and the film sets. And the creative brief was essentially, to educate the audience about the history of feudal Japan and the shogun's rise to power, and do it through a cinematic yet highly stylized lens. For those of you that have seen the series, you know that the photography and the lighting direction and just the production design, everything is ridiculously beautiful. And so it would be, kind of foolish to try to compete with that level of photography. Even though there's some things I've seen here at Unreal Fest, maybe you could challenge that these days. But the idea is to go more stylized, to make something different in the same world, right? And so, like most creative projects, we didn't exactly start out anywhere near where we ended. Initially, we leaned into this idea that all the visuals could have this sort of ink-based, painterly quality to it. Inspired by the sumie artwork of the period, we imagine inky brushstrokes sort of providing pathways and sort of, creating transitions as we move through this story, tell this, this story, taking a journey alongside these sort of sumie brushstrokes, using ink to kind of tell the story. And we could imagine, various characters kind of forming up out of the paint strokes, and other visual elements generating out of the ink as well, like the sakura, the Japanese cherry blossoms, sort of branching and growing outwards, from the ink strokes. We had these ideas about sort of the ink, splatting onto the page and then forming various pieces of architecture, like the Osaka Castle, and keeping it very dimensional and painterly, and using the ink to sort of dimensionalize spaces in an abstract environmental way. As well as just kind of using the bold strokes to sort of accent certain moments in the film. In this early iteration, I wanted to see like full-on samurai battle sequences happening on these sort of planes of ink strokes, and then keeping the color very minimal to something where it could just be sort of red ink flying around to just accentuate certain moments and violence in certain shots. And from here, the feedback, it was, to lean more into the painterly aesthetic, not just so much ink only. And the show is so colorful, like, let's try to get that back in. And so we did another round of paintings. I did these concept paintings that push further into more of like the painted look, while still keeping, a bit of the negative space around the characters, the visual elements. I really like those traditional paintings of all the landscapes from the time period. And I love the idea of kind of journeying through dimensional versions of those kind of ink style paintings. Here's a look at how we might have realized, some of the characters with painterly aesthetics and merging the sort of abstract backgrounds, with paint strokes on the faces and in the clothing. And, this was the beginning of like the discussion about the edges, like how do we get all these visuals to have these painted sort of rough edges in 3D space. These were the early conversations about like paintings in terms of composition. Like, I love the idea of some of our images and compositions just falling off to individual paint strokes at times, and other times it's the paint is like, fully realizing full images. The sumie strokes now just being sort of reserved for just accents to certain images. We were exploring how do we dial in that cinematic look while, preserving the painterly aspect, and while also preserving the super intricate details that we all have come to know with the samurai armor. These were the early sort of looks at what it might look like to put 3D paint strokes in 3D space and use the kanji characters as visual elements to transition from one moment to the next. And, the clients, while they were excited about all the painterly aesthetic, they were feeling that we weren't quite capturing the epic scale of the series and the story that they're telling. On their sets, they're building these gigantic set pieces, and they're telling a story on just a huge stage and scale. And so they really pushed us to try to capture that in our film as well. And so we shifted gears a bit. We started to build a bit more fully realized worlds and a bit more of the dynamic lighting that they were kind of pushing us into. And I'm glad they did, because that was definitely stuff that we wanted to get into anyway. And we started to dial in a much more atmospheric look and built compositions to just show, larger scale moments, as well as more individualized moments of, combat and character shots. It was at this point where we started just early rough animation motion tests where I'm just kind of running cameras, just trying to, early steps about putting the painterly aesthetic to dimensional visuals. It was at this time we started to sort of do some render tests about, the interior spaces and giving that a cinematic look, but yet still very stylized, and how much paint, how much, is just sort of out of engine. And, this was me, in the mocap suit, just doing my best samurai, routine, as you do, just to see how we might start to bring these samurai to life. And then we kind of ended up on this test, fully in engine at this point, where the clients were finally seeing sort of a lot of the boxes getting checked as far as, ways to make this dimensional, painterly look work out. They saw this and they knew we were finally on the right track visually. It felt like a very full world, very large scale, very dimensional, and it still had that painterly quality to it. And this is when we started to build out full environments for all our shots, and it was just very clear that, the decision to use Unreal Engine as our main tool for the entire job was just a no-brainer. As we all know, there's no better tool for world building than Unreal. And UE5 was also just a clear choice in terms of the sheer speed that we were going to need to work to hit our deadline on this thing. As we just explained, working with these clients, there was a ton of back and forth, a ton of creative iteration, not only story-wise and edit-wise, but like just per shot. There was so much iteration back and forth. And Unreal just saved the day for us. And so on that note, I'm going to hand it over to Seiji here, and he'll get into more in-depth execution on the film. Thank you.
Good job.
All right, hey guys. I'm going to share some details now about mainly how we executed this project using Unreal. It was a massive effort. Involved a lot of different artists coming together. So we're really excited to share some of the techniques and process behind the work. So over the course of this production, we were tasked to work in a number of key areas. We had a lot of these epic battle shots that were featuring tons of characters. And in those shots, we would definitely need some simulated clothing, armor, and props to bring them to life. And even for a number of these characters, we were also tasked with trying to capture the likenesses of the actors that would be featured in the series. And all of that would have to be set among some really dynamic, vast, and living environments. And so like Johnny was talking about, one of the distinguishing features of this film would be how we approached its visual style. Overall, we were looking to create this really handcrafted and painterly aesthetic, mainly influenced by watercolor and calligraphy brushwork. And we decided to combine that with this really heavy atmospheric fog and bold silhouettes that would really start to define this visual language. And so we needed this treatment to work across a pretty wide range of scenarios. We had a lot of close-ups and wide shots, but we also needed to work on dynamic objects like characters and simulated meshes. And ideally, we wanted to try to execute the stylization in engine. So most of our earlier tests that we were seeing were relying a little bit more on the compositing side, but we were hoping to gain a little bit more efficiency by seeing that stylization happen more in a real-time environment. And so being able to apply and tweak that style on the fly, we felt like would really reduce a lot of the time spent between rendering and compositing. So here's one of the earliest shots that we worked on, and it really was one of the ones that helped us establish this final look. It was a really good testing ground because there were a lot of various problems to solve in the single shot. We had a really wide, vast landscape in the background, and that builds right up to a foreground environment. We had tons of foliage and even an animated hero character. And so what we're looking at here is a viewport capture of the shot that's playing back through sequencer. And we'll run through some slides now that show how something like this comes together. And so this is what our base environment and lighting would generally look like. We used a mix of assets to build shots like these. The mountain ranges we used Gaia to build out, and then relying on some mega scans and marketplace assets, we started to fill out the landscape and foliage. And so when we build out shots like this, we really wanted to make sure that we had plenty of detail in the set dressing so that, as we started to stylize the look, we had a really strong foundation to work off of. And so, we just wanted to give a quick shout out to William Fauché. Great guy. Luckily, he released his plugin Easy Fog during the course of the project, and it really, really changed the way we worked in Engine. His card-based system was just really efficient and just so easy to use to get art directable fog and clouds into our shots. And before that, we were mainly using VDBs to get localized volume, which were great for three-dimensionality, but as we start to stack them up really heavily in the scene, that really just slows down performance. So we were just really delighted to start working with this. And so here's just a quick capture showing all those cards that we used animating on here. Really quickly, it just kind of changes the character of the shot, right? So we start layering up and stacking a bunch of these cards, and we can add some really nice low-lying fog that's just kind of adding a lot of atmosphere to the valleys and the distant mountains. And so we were using this setup for a while, and there was just a lot of potential in this workflow. And so we started thinking that maybe we could start repurposing it and try to apply it on more kind of painterly effects. And so we started working on some simple blueprints and shaders that would expand the base functionality of the plugin. So already, like the density, geometry, and camera fading features that we were using that shipped with the plugin, they worked really nicely even when we just swapped out clouds for paint strokes. And so on top of this, we added some parameters that would essentially read the pixel values behind the cards that we would place. And then on top of that, you could start multiplying or adding color values, and it would start to create these sort of overlay type effects. And so what was really cool about this was it started kind of feeling like we were working in something like Photoshop, but it was true live 3D space. So it was basically live compositing, I guess. And so after that, we started building out this library of brushstroke textures that we could use, and we would just kind of layer up and stack these in scene, and they would pretty much seamlessly integrate. And so to complement these translucent brushstrokes, we also created a shader variant that would just create solid strokes as well. And so we use these mainly to kind of give a little bit more character and flair along some of those silhouetted edges of the shots that we would get. And one of the cool happy accidents that we found with this was how when we played with the density value, you can basically kind of erode or build up the same texture map, and it kind of creates a lot of different looks for you. And so it was just a really nice way to get just a little bit more sort of mileage out of a single asset. And so this is what it would look like when we would isolate all of the paint strokes that we would use in a single shot. So we focused mainly on just trying to build up a lot of detail by stacking a bunch of these transparent cards into the depth of the shot. And so as the camera starts moving through the space, you just get this nice little bit of sort of textured breakup that feels spatial and dynamic at the same time. And so here's just a quick breakdown animation showing all those layers coming together. So the motion in most of our shots were fairly minimal. So the 2D based setup was actually a really effective approach throughout the entire film. But we did have some moments here and there where we needed a bit more of a 3D approach to help kind of drive home the stylized look. And for those moments, we used a shader-based technique, and this would kind of help give us a little bit more of that organic breakup along the edges of 3D models. And so we combined basically the world position offset with an opacity mask, and that was the main driver for the effect. One of the cool things about this was that since we had a lot of assets coming from a lot of different sources, this technique was basically usable on any of those assets as long as we had UV maps to work with. And so this was kind of the basic approach. You would start with like a hero asset, you duplicate it, and you apply this edge breakup shader. And then from there, you can play with the world position offset, and it starts to create this shell that begins separating from the original model. And after that, you just kind of adjust the masking and tiling of this opacity mask, and you kind of settle on your final look. So yeah, the right kind of offset amounts combined with that proper mask starts to create this little bit of a organic, brushy edge look to all these models. And so yeah, just like the paint strokes that we did, we essentially just built up a collection of these sort of breakup patterns that would work better as like tiling textures for this kind of effect. And yeah, so basically what we would do from there is sort of stack up multiple copies of it and then use just a little bit of different offset textures and offset amounts. And it really just starts to build up the seamlessness of the effect. And yeah, this technique ended up working really well on static assets, but just as easily on dynamic ones. So as an example here, we isolated one of the samurai from our shot. And on top of this edge breakup material, sometimes we would also add some of those solid paint strokes we showed earlier. And if you just attach them to the bones of the skeleton with the right camera angle, you could get just a little bit more of this kind of expressive edge along some of the silhouettes of our characters. And generally, we use this edge breakup technique more as like a finishing touch to our shots, because as you start to duplicate a bunch of these meshes, that could quickly get out of hand. So yeah, it's a bit of a dirty way of working, but yeah, we kind of tried to limit it so that most of our cameras and animations were locked at that point, and so we're just kind of applying this effect where we find it visually necessary. So yeah, as you can see, it kind of looks crusty in the clay render view, but yeah, it just gives a little bit of this extra finish and gives a little bit of a more rugged and crafted look to all these models. So yeah, those were the main techniques that we were using for stylizing the film. Now I just wanted to zoom back out and talk a little bit about the production process. So we started the project using 5.0. Somewhere along the lines we migrated to 5.1, and that's kind of where we used the majority of our production. At the end, we were rendering 4K frames. Most of them were lit using Lumen. And for the CG likeness work, we leveraged a lot of the meta-human framework so that we could take advantage of the body and facial control rigs. And since this was an offline rendered piece from the get-go, we didn't really have any like performance requirements in engine. So we were a bit conscious about the assets we were bringing in, but as long as we could kind of comfortably work in viewport, we just kept moving. Because at the end of the day, we were just kind of trying to prioritize getting the highest fidelity visuals we could out of engine. And so the general workflow for the project looks something like this. Yeah, we created and received a lot of different assets coming from all sorts of DCCs. And generally, we were relying on Unreal to be kind of the creative hub of our project. And it's where we initially blocked out our shots. We converted storyboards to previs. And then from there, look dev, animation, cleanup, and such, that remained in engine as much as possible. And then at the end, we would render out EXR frames for some light compositing work and color grading using Nuke. So we typically were building our shots with a modular approach. Usually we have like a main shot level, and that kind of gets broken out into sub-levels that are broken per discipline. And we just do this to kind of keep the shot compartmentalized, and so multiple artists can work on the same shot, maybe different parts of it at the same time. And so to begin our previs on the film, we relied on motion capture. So FX did a bunch of planning and directing for the mocap shoot, and they were also developing the script and storyboards at the same time. But yeah, so over the course of 2 shoot days, we got maybe around 100 different takes across a number of different actors. And here's just a quick lineup of some of the captures we got. So we got a ton of takes with combat-related stuff, but we also had plenty of animations to work with that would cover the non-combat shots as well. And so with these assets ready to go, we would start playing with cameras and shot blocking and get this production off the ground. And so here's just a typical progress of showing a shot from previs through to final. One thing that was really cool was just how fluid the workflow was, and we were just really able to quickly capture and convey the mood and final lighting, even from like the earliest stages of the shot. So incrementally over the course of the production, you would just kind of build up, replace assets, clean up animation, add simulation, and then we'd finish off with the stylization and color grading. And so while we were developing the shots, obviously a big part of the work that we saw earlier was creating these simulated assets that would help bring this world to life. So our FX team did a really great job, creating all sorts of different simulations that we brought into Engine. There were around 50 or so shots in the film that had simulated assets involved. That included things like CFX, cloth, fluids, grain sims, smoke, sparks, fire, you name it. And so for our CFX process, it was a pretty straightforward one, I would say. We opted for simulating armor and cloth in Houdini rather than in Engine, I think mainly due to the talent we had available on the job. So after some initial shot blocking and previs, we would get some initial buy-in from both internal leaders and the client as well. And then from there, because all of our characters were retargeted to the metahuman skeleton, it was just a pretty straightforward process to bake those initial mocap clips out to a control rig. So there we would just kind of do some cleanup for hands and also just any kind of enhancement we wanted to do in terms of posing and just timing, whatnot. And so when that was ready to go, we would send these out as FBX clips to Houdini for simulation. And yeah, our artists did an amazing job. They would just kind of like isolate certain parts of the armor in certain cases that needed just kind of extra detail in the animation that we couldn't get out of regular skinned meshes. And then from there, we would bring it back into Engine and replace in shot. And so we had a few varieties of outfits and props that we had to simulate through the film. And for all of these, we used alembics to bring them back into Engine. One of the really cool things that we found was just how well the simulations would hold up with time dilation and slow motion. Just like gave us so much more flexibility to work with as we started to hone in on that final edit. And so another huge part of the simulation work was fluid simulations. So again, on this, we used Houdini to get a high quality result and relied on alembics to bring them back into Engine. So this shot here is just way further slowed down than the final film, but we just wanted to take a little moment to appreciate some of the really dynamic work that these guys did. And so we also had like small shots, but also mid-sized fluid shots as well. So in general, we just wanted to be careful about kind of working within our camera angles, and we're pretty careful to simulate only what was necessary, and that was just to try to maintain at least some sort of level of efficiency and performance as we brought these back into Engine. And this setup here is probably one of the most complex ones of the show. Yeah, our FX artist prototyped essentially these rain droplets and how they would impact the sand as they fell through. And then they kind of extrapolated that into this larger setup and integrated it with a fluid solver. And yeah, really just kind of came through for us on this sand garden shot. And we also had a number of fire sims to create. These were also typically done in Houdini. We would export as animated VDBs for the flames and smoke. And then the kind of floating particles and embers, those would be typically animated alembic caches. But for some shots like on the top left, we did end up using EmberGen for generating cards with just simple flipbook animations. Yeah, and typically those kind of decisions were done, basically just kind of thinking about the size of the asset in the shot and how quickly we could create these assets using EmberGen. It just kind of makes sense. And so the last part of the project I wanted to talk about was our hero character work. It was definitely one of the most challenging parts of the show. We just really needed to be respectful and sensitive about capturing the likenesses of the actors. And so we relied on creating zebra sculpts, and those were guided by a combination of photo references and scan data. And so here's just a quick capture showing some of our final sculpts in the ZBrush viewport. And yeah, as you can see, we went pretty detailed down to the pores and the wrinkles and the beauty marks. Yeah, it took a number of different rounds and iterations to get final approval. And then, yeah, once we had the approval, we would start transferring this data over to create Unreal-ready assets. And so to do that, with the high-resolution sculpts, we took the base metahuman head and began matching that topology to the sculpted geometry in Houdini. So different facial features were essentially mapped to line up with the metahuman topology. And by doing that, we could kind of leverage that complex facial rig that Epic had already created. And so, yeah, when we can leverage that asset, it was pretty seamless to be able to just kind of hook into the faceboard control rig and start bringing these characters to life. And so, yeah, once the final geometry was set, we also kind of received some groom assets over from FX, and we started to match those to the final geometry as well. And so on the right there is just kind of how the character was starting to look as we brought them into Engine. And here's the same hero character, showed up, hooked up to the metahuman rig and ready for animation. So for these like portrait shots and close-ups for our characters, we did end up kind of setting them over a black background. Mainly, we were doing that so that we could get a clean composite with the edge of the hair with camera depth of field. We also ended up rendering our portraits in Path Tracer. So, when it came to render time, it did add just a little bit extra speed to it by just kind of isolating our characters. Yeah, and so we repeated this across, I think, 6 different hero characters. And so, yeah, over the course of the film, the facial animations were fairly, minimal. But there definitely was a learning process in terms of kind of realizing how important the facial expressions were themselves. So in many cases, capturing the right expressions can sometimes almost be as important as having the right kind of base sculpt data, especially for just kind of, capturing that final likeness. And so, yeah, being able to leverage that faceboard control rig just made it so much easier for our team to achieve this. And so, yeah, I think that about covers, the work that we did on creating this piece. We just have another process reel that we cut together here, which kind of sums up, what we've seen today. Thanks, guys.
Thank you so much, everybody.